Are you new to Romantasy? Here are the books that you need to read. Hi, I'm Amrita Portake and welcome to my channel. This was my first year reading Romantasy, and I went from reading fiction and romance to finding this one book. And this book changed my life. I feel like my reading habits are always going to be defined pre this book and post this book because it just changed how I feel about this genre, how I feel about the books itself. I was going through a reading slump and it just pushed me out of it. Not just gave me a slight push, but threw me out of my reading slump. It was amazing. And the book is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, or more lovingly called as ACOTAR. This series is going to change your life. If you have not read this yet, it is seriously going to change how you think about books. And yes, there are many people who have different points of view on this book, but I think if you want to give a book a chance, you need to start here. It wasn't that fantasy and romantasy didn't exist before Sarah J. Maas, but her style of writing, the characters, and the way it sucks you in the story, the way you want to root for these characters is just next level. Absolutely love this book, and more so the series itself, because you just cannot stop at this book. I wish I could tell you that I took this book and I stopped it and I moved on. This is how I started with my romantasy journey this year. I got this book before I was leaving for my summer vacation. And I was like, it's a big book, so I don't think I'm gonna have that much time to read during vacation, because I was traveling quite a bit. And I was like, well, it was a long flight, so I was like, okay, maybe I'll read it on the flight, and maybe I'll need it on the flight back, and maybe a little bit during the vacation itself. As soon as I picked up this book, I could not put it down. I was reading in late nights, early mornings. I was reading as I was going and sightseeing. I was sitting there opening up my iPad and sitting and reading. Oh my gosh, it just pulled me into this beautiful story, an amazing storyline. And I finished the entire series. I kid you not. The entire series. This is the whole series of books. And I finished the entire series in 6 days. Yeah, that was something. I was kind of in a reading slump before this, but this was just amazing. So to just give you a quick background, I don't want you to read too much about this book and about the stories before you start reading it, because you really need to experience the book. The cliffhangers are just... My jaw was on the floor. I wish I could have recorded my reaction every time I was reading the cliffhangers. I literally was like throwing the iPad down and I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. The cliffhangers are something. So I would say don't read a lot about this book. It is about Fair Archer, and it is about her journey when she goes through the fairy realm after killing a wolf, who in fact is a fairy. The first part itself was jarring for me, where I saw this female character who was not afraid to just kill a wolf, and the way she has been described, and because she's young, she is like 19 years old when the book starts, it's kind of shocking as to how brave and fearless she is. Even though she is quite scared of whatever is going on around her, it is still the decisions she makes every time she goes through these big moments in her life are really brave, and it is an amazing book. As I mentioned, this is a whole series and she's still writing the series. So the series isn't over. Right now there are 5 books in the series and she's still writing more books in this series. But this particular book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Every moment I'm like, this is Beauty and the Beast. This is Beauty and the Beast. Oh my gosh. And initially when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I like this, but it is very similar to Beauty and the Beast, and
I don't know what's going to be new about it after I'm done with the book. And yeah, it is a lot. So yes, please stick with it, even if you feel like it's one of the same tropes. You are going to love it. It is also about fae and fairies, and just pick it up, just get it. So after I finished the whole series, I was like, oh my gosh, I just need more. I need more. I need a fix after going through this world. And I picked up Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And whew, that's another awesome book. This currently has 2 books, and there's a 3rd book coming out in January. So it's coming out pretty soon. And if you haven't read it yet, I would definitely recommend reading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. They are really good. I have some issues with the way this book is structured, especially the first book. So the basic premise of the book is that it starts off at this military college where our protagonist Violet going through different trials and tribulations to be able to graduate this college. One thing that I absolutely adore about this book is that it has dragons. And oh my gosh, these might be my favorite dragons of all time. How to Train Your Dragon would be one of my favorite dragon movies of all time. And I think this kind of reminds me of that particular dragon because I love this dragon so much. Tyrion is so amazing and sassy and rude and cool. I love him. He is one of the best dragons I have read about. And then there's also Andarna, and oof, this is another book I would highly recommend. The trope is supposed to be enemies to lovers. I don't know if it is particularly enemies to lovers. It might be, I like him, but I don't like him kind of thing. So I don't know if it is more so enemies to lovers, but it is a slow burn romance, and especially when it starts. And it is about a military academy, as I mentioned. The first time that I was reading it, it kind of gave me Hunger Games vibes as I was reading it. It felt a little bit similar to that. But once the dragons come into the picture, the dragons just are too cool. They are just amazing. And Xaden and Violet are such beautiful characters, even though we don't know a lot about Xaden. This is again another book that I had to go back and read again after I was done reading The Fourth Wing, because there are so many things that you feel like you missed when you're reading it the first time after you know the ending, that I had to go back and look at a lot of things again and again. And even now, before the Onyx Storm comes out, I'm definitely going to be rereading Fourth Wing and the Iron Flame, because I need to be back in those characters to know exactly where we left off and read the Onyx Storm. The next book is interesting because I feel like I have read equal amounts of love and hate about this online. It's When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. Oof. Honestly, I was going to just stop reading it at about 30% of the book. I was going to DNF the book and was just done with it. It was so slow in the beginning and there was so much going on. I just did not understand what was going on. It is about the main character called Reeve, who's a skilled assassin. I don't want to give a lot of the book away. And the concept here is very different about the dragons. It is such a different world that she has created. I would definitely recommend sticking it out if you feel like this is boring or going too slow, because it will pick up. It picks up pretty quickly and pretty soon. This is another book that I feel like I want to go back and reread again, because there is so much going on that the first time you're reading the book, you miss a lot of those points. And by the time you're at the end of the book, you're like, oh my gosh. And then I had to go back and reread the entire book. So I loved it. It feels very much like poetry to me. There are some dialogues between the two protagonists that just feel like pure poetry, and even the beautiful illustrations that are there in the book are romantic and beautiful and just charming. There's just so much charm about this book that I love it. This is the first book in the series, and there are more books coming out, and I can't wait to read the next book. There is so much going to be happening in the next book that I just can't wait to read that one. It is something. I would highly, highly recommend this book. The next book is a huge, not just a book, because you will not be able to stop at just one book, but a whole series from Sarah J. Maas, which is The Throne of Glass. And I have heard mixed reviews from people saying that they love Throne of Glass better than ACOTAR. And I honestly don't agree with that, because I feel I loved ACOTAR more. There are some things about The Throne of Glass that maybe I will create a detailed review about each of the books, and maybe we can talk about that. But there were some things that really bothered me about The Throne of Glass, which were core to the concept of the book itself. I was kind of bothered by them as I was reading them. There are 8 books in this series, and there are some books that just are heart-wrenching. They're just heart-wrenching, the way some of the scenes are written. And in The Kingdom of Ash, there is one scene that is written that just had me completely sobbing. So it is heartbreaking and really, really, really heart-wrenching. And that was difficult to read. But nonetheless, it is very entertaining. And even though I had problems with it, I finished these books in 12 days. Yeah, I finished them really fast. I could not put them down. So even though it was not my favorite as much as I love the ACOTAR series, I still like them, and I just breezed through all of them. They are really well written and very engaging books. So the next book is viral all over BookTok and BookTube, and it is talked about by everyone who loves the romantasy genre, and that is One Dark Window by Rachel Gilley. It is a duology with a dark fantasy. I love the world building in this particular series. I also love their magic system. It was very unique and not something that I had read before. It starts off as this world where if you're infected with magic in this particular world, where you are hunted, and if you have that particular set of magic, you need to keep it a secret. And our female main character, or our FMC, is infected by this magic. The book is about how she deals with her life, having this kind of magic, how she goes through the world. The part that I really loved about the book was, one, the magical system, and two, the familial dynamics that they have shown. I really enjoyed how beautiful the bonds are in between all of them, and it was so well written, and it is heartwarming to read that, even though the book itself is very dark. And if you don't like dark fantasy, this might not be a book for you, because it is quite dark. There is a little bit of an element of paranormal combined with fantasy, combined with romance. Some people say they like the second book even better than the first book. I loved both of them equally. Honestly, they were both amazing. The first book kind of leads up to the second book, and the second book rounds out this series really beautifully. For the next book, I wasn't actually sure if I was going to like this book, but I loved the cover images. They are so beautiful, they're colorful, and this is how it looks like. The book is called Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maurer. I hope I got the last name right. This is a series which has 2 books out right now, and there is a 3rd book coming out. Even if you read the first 2 books, they are very enjoyable. Even though I was hesitant about reading this book, I am so glad I picked it up, because it was so cute. I love the characters. I absolutely adored the MMC. Most of the MMCs in fantasy that recently have been reading are quite dark, and have quite a lot of problems. And this MMC actually is supposed to be dark. He is the villain. And having said that, I felt like he was one of the most charming and sweet and kind MMCs that I have recently read about. He is so sweet. Yes, it is dark. There are elements to this that are not as fluffy and sweet as they should be, and has one of the most lovable and awesome MMCs I have read in the past few months. The assistant who is hired by him is our FMC, who is Evie Sage, and it is about the magical system in this forest, and it is about these morally ambiguous characters who are not just straightforward and are kind of morally gray characters, especially Tristan, who is the villain in this book. How he navigates the world when he is supposed to be dark, and how he still has these redeeming qualities. But then the FMC, who is supposed to be a very kind and charming young woman, also deals with her own darkness and her moral boundaries. I liked how this book made me think about what sometimes moral boundaries can be in books, and how we look at characters even though they're supposed to be villains or heroes. And one of the things I loved about this book is how strong the female protagonist is, how Evie is not willing to give up, and how she keeps going even though there are so many obstacles in her way. And even though there is all this darkness around her, how she still is resourceful and determined to keep her family together and make sure her family gets the help that she needs. I really enjoyed reading about Evie's journey and how it brings her together with Tristan and into this morally gray world of the villain. The next book is another series that is gone super viral all over BookTok and is talked about by the book community quite a lot in fantasy, and that is the Belladonna series by Adeline Grace. The first book is also called Belladonna, and it is about this orphan called Signa who is cursed right from birth but still unable to die, and how she's constantly surrounded by death. We go on a journey with her as she grows up and grows from a baby into adulthood, and eventually she ends up in this thorn grove where one of her distant relatives takes her in, and there she has to solve this mystery, and how she figures out the secrets that are kept from her for her own life and that are going on in the manor itself. It was really, really cool. It is quite dark, and again, it has a paranormal element to the story. So it is a dark fantasy romance, and very interesting as to how they have written the first book. The first book especially, I was like, what is going on and why is this happening, and like, is she gonna die, is she not, like what is going on? There are some things that were quite obvious even though they were supposed to be secret, but I feel like I could figure them out early on. But there were some things in the book that I could not even figure out. The mystery element was there right until the end and kept me guessing. So I really enjoyed this book. And after reading Belladonna, I read the remaining 2 books in the series, and they were also absolutely amazing. And the tropes are gothic, fantasy, and forbidden romance. So if those are not something that you like, then I would skip this book. It also has a crime thriller element added to the paranormal, dark, romantasy book that it is. But it's less of a trope than the rest of it, but it is part of the book. The next book was recommended a lot on Romantasy, and I am going to recommend it here because I feel like the book was really beautiful. But I don't consider it so much of a romantasy. I think this is more of historical fiction or a war romance rather than fantasy or romantasy. Fantasy element in it is very slight, so I would categorize it more as a wartime romance with a slight fantasy element. But having said that, it is still quite beautifully written. This is another book that I felt like it was very poetic, and although it slowed down a little bit in the second book for me, it was also quite heart-wrenching and difficult to read in some parts because I was just sobbing. I was just reading it and sobbing through the book. It is really beautifully written, and it starts off as a story about these two main characters, Iris and Roman, who are rival reporters, and how while writing these stories and while reporting on a war that is going on, how they get involved in the war and how they use these magical letters to write to each other. The only thing I would have liked more of in this book, and I feel like a complaint that I have, is I wanted more of these letters that they wrote to each other. I just wanted more of those. They were such beautiful and heartwarming letters that they both wrote to each other that I just wanted even more of those letters that go back and forth between Roman and Iris. The next one is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. And I feel like when I look at Sarah J. Maas series, this might be my least favorite Sarah J. Maas book, but it is still a good series on its own. I just don't like it as compared to the Throne of Glass, and especially not compared to the ACOTAR series. The first book starts with the Crescent City, and the third book, which won this year's Goodread Awards for the romantasy genre. I don't know if that would have been my pick. I know it was really hyped and people were really looking forward to that one. But when I have read all of her other books, that might be actually my least favorite book. It was okay. I was not very happy with the way it was written and the events that are taking place in the book, where she has tried to bring in two different universes together. It was a little disappointing, to be very honest. But the first book actually starts off with a bang. I did like Crescent City. Still not as good as ACOTAR or Throne of Glass, but I did like it. It still would be my least favorite series. It is based on a more of an urban fantasy setting. And if you are into Sarah J. Maas's universe, and if you love Throne of Glass, and if you love ACOTAR, especially if you love ACOTAR, I would say you will have to read this series because there is stuff that is going to come up in the next ACOTAR book and you will want to know it. And I think that is more so why I'm recommending it, because I love ACOTAR and she is writing the next ACOTAR book. So whatever book comes up next, there is going to be some reference from this series. And if you like to know what's going on and what happens in individual series, you have to read this one. Otherwise, just skip it. The last one is a series I'm still reading, but I have loved it so much so far, and that is the Road of Bones series by Demi Winters. I am about 70% done with the first book. I think there are 3 books in the series and 2 books are currently out. It is a fantasy romance with a very strong female protagonist, and I really love her. I think it is such an interesting character, and a lot of the focus, especially in this first book, is on the female protagonist. I am still kind of confused as to who the male protagonist is and who it's going to be in the second book. I don't know. I try not to read the synopsis in advance for these romantasy books because I don't want to read any of the spoilers. So if you're like me, then that's all you should go with. Don't read the synopsis, but I would definitely recommend picking up this book. It is about the main character called Scylla, who starts on this journey after she loses her father, and how during the journey she meets this group of people and how she needs to get to this place called Copa, and she's alone, has no resources, and how she kind of cons this huge group into letting her travel with them. I really enjoyed Scylla's character. She is a little bit naive because she is young and has not seen the world, has been very sheltered by her father. But still there is this sharpness and a little bit of cunningness to her into finding her way and using the resources that she has to be able to get to the place that she needs to. At least where I am right now, there is also love triangles, maybe, sort of, I don't know yet. It is a high fantasy romance featuring Vikings, so if you love Viking romances, this is definitely a book for you. The part I also loved about this book is the found family that this whole group has with each other. It is really sweet and charming, and I adore found family stories, and this is definitely one of them. If you like that trope, I would highly recommend reading this book. I would say that the book starts off a little bit slower in the beginning, but it does ramp up pretty quickly, and the pacing is quite good as you keep going ahead through the book. Right now, I'm at a point in my book where I really need to finish it because I don't know what's going on. And if you want to know what are the books that are on my TBR list, check out this video right here.